The movie begins with a genius artist named Fernando, who spends his days painting and making carvings. But a career that has lasted 20 years is not promising at all, because the income as an artist is very small, and it certainly makes Fernando think hard every day. Besides being an artist, he also supplements his income by working as a martial arts teacher, even though he himself is not interested in that field. Fernando is a genius, and he learns everything so quickly. When Fernando returned from teaching, he was wet from the splash of a car, after which he immediately threw away his cigarette. But at that moment, Fernando accidentally noticed the flow of the cigarette that continued to be carried towards the water ditch, and who would have thought that at this time of night, he would be taken to the front of a bank called Bank Rio. Somehow the crazy idea came up. Fernando immediately ran to follow the flow of water, which turned out to be right on the road. There was a large culvert. The next morning, he immediately approached a technician named Sebastian. As a friend who knew about the crazy idea, Sebastian suggested that the plan should be supported by a funding supplier, as they would need cars, equipment, and other attributes. Fernando then came across a man named Dog. He was a close relative of his who had an extraordinary adherence to religion. Even so, Dog was still a human being. He soon introduced Fernando to an elegant man named Mario. In his daily life, Mario is able to communicate well, even though everything is just nonsense, but no one realizes that his skill in lying actually makes Mario very good at living his hobby. A hobby with an extraordinary level of risk and highly avoided by everyone, namely robbery, night is a favorite time for Mario. In the dark, he only takes 10 minutes to carry out each of his hobbies. Mario managed to break into a safe in one of the offices in no time, and even once in an urgent situation, he was able to come up with a lie while pretending to be an intern. Coincidentally, the person he tricked this time was a cleaning service, and the woman could only nod to Mario's words. While running his hobby, Mario always gave what he got to his daughter named Lucia, without ever telling him where the money came from. But behind it all, Mario really loves his daughter, who has been working as a makeup artist since her mother passed away. Until one night, Fernando was seen coming when Mario was planning to do the action, but Mario thought that Fernando was a spy. Then a few hours after that, the doc deliberately called Mario just to tell him that the man was his relative. As a result, when morning arrived, Fernando immediately held a meeting with Mario. During the meeting, Fernando explained that he needed a supply of funds for a big action. From there, Fernando immediately brought Mario to show the crazy plan he had in mind. In this case, Fernando dropped the meter rope from the road surface to the bottom of the water channel, and even that night, they both walked into the water channel. Relying on his meter, Fernando immediately knew that the distance from the road surface to the bottom of the culvert was 18 meters. Fernando also found out that every 2 days, the water in the water channel would overflow. And to avoid heavy rain, they had to follow the weather forecast distributed by the official body in the city. On the second day, the meeting was held again. This time, the doc participated in order to discuss the workings of the motion sensor. And it was at the meeting that Fernando managed to prove that the motion sensor could be anticipated by wearing a thick jacket. This happens because the tool will only work if there is a temperature difference between the room temperature and the temperature of the object. As a result, in the morning, Sebastian and Fernando immediately entered the Rio Bank in order to map the place. The two of them coordinated with each other while covering each other's movements. At this point, Fernando deliberately made the security guard suspicious by pretending to take pictures of the bank. This made the security guard immediately call the central police to bring Fernando to the security room. From here, Fernando managed to remember every room in the bank. Even the two officers were immediately displeased because they both could not find anything wrong with Fernando. After the observations were made, Fernando immediately poured all his memories into the building plans. Doc, Mario, and Sebastian were dumbfounded by Fernando's very, very detailed memories. Doc was immediately tasked with measuring the length of the distance from the water hole to the position of the building, and with just a dock bike was able to calculate the distance without raising suspicion. The distance from the water hole to the bank building is 7 meters 10 centimeters, while the distance from the bottom of the culvert to the surface is 18 meters. With these two numbers, Fernando managed to calculate the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse will be very useful for them. Immediately, all personnel went into the culvert to mark the benchmark of an inlet. Without missing a beat, the length of the inlet had to be exactly the same as the figure obtained from Fernando's calculations. Meanwhile, to find out the workings of a safe inside the bank, Mario moved to move like a customer who wanted to store valuables. And from here, he managed to memorize the security system in the safe in detail, and would become a valuable benchmark for Sebastian. Not enough to stop there, they have also rented a fan from Mario's relative named Alberto at the cheapest possible price. As time goes by, their careful planning becomes more and more obvious. The hole that was made was visible, even though it had to be adjusted again constantly. But here was one thing that made Mario hesitate. I was still curious about Fernando's overall plan both when they entered and exited. Because Fernando was not fully able to explain all that and there were still flaws in his plan, Mario immediately resigned because he still cared deeply about his daughter's existence. Once upon a time, Fernando and his girlfriend were looking at the beauty of the sky at night, but who did he get an idea suddenly? At that moment, he rushed to go to Mario, who always moved every day. Fernando explained that the bank's security system is only divided into two conditions, namely when operating and also when not operating. But until now, the bank has never thought about if an action occurs in both conditions. The robbers would enter and exit through the front door when the bank was open. But when the bank was closed, the robbers would enter and exit through other channels. As a result, Fernando thought to enter through the front door while exiting through other channels, which was none other than the path was a hole they had made, where previously they had deliberately made a hole to enter and exit. And after a convincing explanation, the final plan was finalized. What is clear is that when everything was really ripe, Sebastian immediately went into action by entering the water channel, while Dog, Alberto, Mario, and Fernando would enter the bank. Suddenly, everything went smoothly, and they managed to threaten the customers, including an officer who was inside. But one of the CCTV officers managed to call the police regarding the robbery. This is where the hostage action was really carried out neatly, where CCTV officers were also taken prisoner to avoid unwanted things. Although in the end Mario also deliberately released him, while the bank manager was immediately hidden in the warehouse. Not only that, all CCTV cameras were also closed by them in order to avoid traces of recording of the action. On the other hand, Sebastian and Fernando managed to penetrate the wall through the hole they made. Without lingering, they immediately opened a safe box in the room by relying on a tool that had been adjusted by Sebastian. Incredibly enough, with just 7 seconds, the tool was able to break into a safe at the bank. Their action will run for 2 hours, and you can imagine how many safes were successfully broken into. In a different situation, the reporter, the police, and the soldiers were already in front of the bank building. And during a robbery, the police would rely on a negotiator named Leo. Clearly, in conditions like this, Mario's abilities are really used. Casually, Mario introduces himself as a man named Walter. Here, Mario also says that there are several people who are on the roof, and he asks them to come down immediately. But who would have thought that it was true that on top of the building there were already soldiers who managed to climb up? During this stretching phase, Sebastian and Fernando were seen moving quickly. While the authorities were busy strategizing to avoid any casualties, it was fortunate that Mario was a man of few words, and he was delighted when a prisoner had to pee. When the prisoner was deliberately released, he was no longer able to provide any information, so the police could only be made to wait while the entire safe was being drained by Sebastian and Fernando. Shortly from that, a cell phone was seen ringing suddenly, which turned out to be the cell phone of a grandmother who happened to be having a birthday today. Here, Mario really had a very high level of sympathy. He also deliberately asked for a biscuit along with a lighter from a prisoner in order to celebrate the grandmother's birthday together. It was so cool that the police were dumbfounded when the grandmother said that the robbers were good people. Even for the grandmother herself during her birthday, this is the first time she will remember her birthday until she dies. A few minutes later, Leo called again while bringing a prosecutor. It was hoped that with the prosecutor, Mario would surrender voluntarily. But in fact, nothing. Mario even splashed the prosecutor with harsh words. He also said that the prosecutor had 5 young wives. As a result, Mario offered to make the police immediately call his personal lawyer, where without knowing the number used is the number of one of the customers. While the name of the lawyer Mario deliberately took from a name on the insurance board. At that moment, Mario immediately acts as a lawyer named Juan. This time he communicates again with the prosecutor as if they have known each other for a long time. Time after time went by, the break-in action was also carried out to completion, which when the time came, the closing plan was immediately carried out together. But it turned out that Leo was not a stupid cop. He also deliberately called back the lawyer's number while calling Mario repeatedly, and clearly from the 2 calls, twice, similar cell phone ringing sounds were also heard simultaneously. Of course, a moment like this is a crucial moment for both parties. Leo, who this time was approached by the bank director, was told that there was no way out other than the entrance. But in this position, Leo's view went straight to a waterhole. He knew exactly that the robbers had made a way out of the hole, but his opinion was not heard at all by the commander and led to Leo being ordered to wait until the time came. While in another situation, Fernando was seen deliberately gathering each of the weapons they had brought, where Mario began to lead the prisoners and headed to a hole in one of the file rooms. And in the closing act, Fernando also attached a paper right above the position of their weapons. It is not yet known exactly what was written on the paper, but clearly the prisoners began to stand up and take their respective cell phones, which soon after each family of the prisoners began to inform that all prisoners were able to call, as a result of which the police and soldiers were immediately mobilized thoroughly. At the same time, Mario and Fernando had just finished cleaning up their tracks in the file room. It was a race against time for both parties. However, Fernando's advantage was that they all managed to escape from the building seamlessly, while in a different situation, Leo noticed an irregularity. The cleanliness of the floor in one room was much different from the floor in another room. And from that thought, an exit hole was uncovered that had been linked to the presence of a grenade. But shortly afterward, a police officer managed to give the news that all the weapons used were toy weapons. Not only that, they also deliberately rented a fan at a cheap price, because the fan would be a means of escaping right above a water hole, 3 kilometers away that they had climbed together. With a bad fan, the driver's presence to continue waiting while pretending to have a tire leak would not arouse suspicion. And obviously with this escape action, the police, including Leo, immediately lost the chase. The top brass of the army police, prosecutors, and even Leo also read the writing that drew them. Where the writing reads in a neighborhood without guns or grudges, rich people will only talk and have money, but definitely not love. Where with that writing, Fernando and his friends managed to prove that their plan had really come to fruition. Piles of gold money and various securities were also in front of their eyes. Those who actually have heart and sympathy, but are in the wrong place. And from there, who else will appreciate all these results if not themselves? You can see the money earned really will not run out for 7 generations. Where in the end, the police were no longer able to find traces of them all. All the evidence was completely eliminated and had to be closed with all the great achievements. The religious dock managed to upgrade its worship facilities. Mario managed to make his son happy. Fernando managed to resolve his grievances. Sebastian managed to spread out to the section with his son and wife. And Alberto managed to cheat on his wife by playing with women. Now of all the good things, Alberto was the only one who did bad things, which without realizing it would be fatal for all of them. The fatality immediately began with the wife who was hurt, and the woman immediately gave a report to the police that her husband was one of the perpetrators of the Rio Bank robbery. With the discovery of stacks of money in every crevice of the ceiling of the house, the news spread quickly and everyone realized that Fernando intended to go to Paraguay to isolate himself as far as possible. While in a different situation, Sebastian was arrested without being able to provide resistance, as well as the driver's dock and Mario, who was enjoying time with Lucia. No one expected that exactly on that day Mario had to part with his favorite daughter. Mario's new home was surrounded by police and he was arrested right in front of Lucia's eyes. But even so, Lucia continued to support her father and she always prayed for the best for Mario. Not long after, the police immediately acted to arrest the originator of the idea, the brain of the crazy plan. While in the mountainous area of Paraguay, Fernando was no longer able to evade. All the evidence had been collected and he could only surrender while sitting down. But here, Sin immediately switched to 19 months later. Dressed all in blue, Fernando was immediately greeted by Mario in his luxury car. And surely you will wonder why they can be free quickly. It's all because of a paper that was attached by Fernando. Or in essence, the rich will always have more advantages than those below them. So all the complaints from Fernando were really proven, and this time he and his relatives were able to feel the benefits. At the end of the movie, we are shown that this case is indeed taken from real life on January 13, 2006. At that time, 6 robbers perfectly managed to break into a bank in the city of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Relying on toy guns, during the action they also took 23 people hostage and reaped $227 billion from 147 safes, which ultimately, the action was declared the best robbery of the century. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel. Thank you for watching.